Hello. So I'm gonna shift it a little bit and move over to creative nonfiction. So this first essay that I wrote is kind of funny. Probably I should feel embarrassed about it, but I don't, and it's okay. But yeah, it's called One Hit Blunders, and it's an essay about my not so successful dating life. But yeah, the beginning of my essay just kind of talks about just kind of weaving in just my like opinions about dating. And before this part that I'm going to read, it talks about somebody that I dated. So I mean, really, I'm just kind of exposing all these people that I went on dates with. But yeah, okay. So I'd first like to preface this by saying, unless you're a mature adult, do not date your coworker. It's not worth it. That being said, let's talk about Chris. I met Chris approximately 2 months after the whole Jonathan situation, which again is somebody before him. And I also happened to work with both these people, and for part of the time I worked with them together, so that was a really fun situation. But anyways, he was a seasonal hire at Target, which I still work there to this day, so that's cool. So I figured he wouldn't be staying around for long. Boy, was I wrong. I thought he was cute, but I knew he had a girlfriend, so I tried to keep my interest in check. We were friendly when we saw each other occasionally, and that continued through the fall, winter, and all the way into the following spring. One afternoon, when we were a little chattier than normal, he suggested hanging out sometime outside of work. I innocently gave him my phone number and we began texting. One time he messaged me, "What is your goal for our friendship?" Firstly, I thought that was a strange question for him to ask me. But I brushed it off and replied that I just wanted to be good friends. I was under the impression that we weren't just friends and that I had made that pretty clear. So you can imagine my confusion when he told me that he thought I was beautiful not once, but twice. Looking back, I realized that was as red of a flag as any, but back then I was so naive. I let it go and still agreed to go see a movie with him. He bought my ticket, red flag, and refused to let me pay him back for it, red flag, and he offered to pick me up, stop sign red flag. All of that, and my idiot self still went into the night thinking it was not a date. If I could go back in time, I'd tell myself that when something seems odd or slightly off, that's probably because it is. I'd tell myself to be direct and confrontational with people, aka Chris. I wouldn't have let it get past him paying for my ticket, and honestly, if the rest of those red flags still followed, I would have called the date off. In my defense, it was not supposed to be a date because we both said that we were only friends and nothing more. But I digress. The movie we saw was Ready Player One, and my goodness, did that movie feel like it was an eternity long. At the beginning of the movie, he asked to put his arm around me, and I froze up and just said, "Sure." Redder than red flag. I must have looked extremely uncomfortable because he asked me if it was awkward, and I immediately said yes. Luckily, he took his arm back and didn't try anything else for the rest of the movie. The worst part was that I had to pee so badly that my bladder physically hurt, and I couldn't just go to the bathroom right after that awkward situation, so I gave it about 20 minutes before I dashed out of the theater. I'm not going to lie, for a good minute I sat on that toilet and genuinely considered just leaving. I couldn't believe what just happened, and I was finally starting to lose my color blindness to those red flags. I kept replaying him putting his arm around me in my head, and each time made me cringe harder and harder. If the stall door would have been open and some girl walked by and saw my face, she probably would have assumed I was constipated. Although if that were really to happen, that would have been a lot more awkward. As I continued to stall in the stall by going over the pros and cons of walking out of the theater and driving away, I remembered an interview with Kelly Clarkson that I had seen. In the interview, she was asked, "What is something in your life that you regret?" To which she responded with a story about how she ditched a date one time by going to the bathroom and never coming back. As much as I adore Kelly Clarkson, I didn't want to make the same mistake as her. But mostly, I didn't want to make work any more uncomfortable than it most likely was already going to be. I put my big girl pants back on and marched back into that movie. The movie itself was alright, and afterward, he hugged me, which I had again not anticipated. I saw him moving in, so I went for the casual one-arm hug, while Chris wrapped both his arms around me, which didn't feel bad or weird necessarily. But at the time, I was still so confused that I just kind of was like, okay, is this how friends hug? Maybe not. He offered to walk me to my car, and I didn't let him, and then we drove our separate ways. The next day, I texted him about my confusion and mixed feelings. I told him that I went into that movie not thinking it was a date because I was under the impression that we were just friends. And I reminded him of his interesting question about my goal for our friendship. To this, he decided to play dumb by saying that he didn't remember establishing that we were only friends. And then he had the audacity to try to make me feel bad by saying, "Silly me for going into last night thinking it was a date." After that, I texted him that I was also under the impression that he was still dating his girlfriend of 2 years, and that was the reason why I assumed it wasn't a date. He was quick to respond by telling me that they had broken up 3 weeks prior. I did the math and put it together that 2 years in a relationship plus 3 weeks out of a relationship equals a rebound. I made it very clear that nothing was going to happen between us by specifically telling him that I didn't want to date him and that I only wanted to be friends. Instead of handling it like a grown man, he responded like a butthurt child by deciding to never speak to me at work again. He didn't even acknowledge me, and he acted as if he didn't know me at all. Needless to say, I thought that there couldn't be anyone worse than him, but of course there was. So, the rest of my essay goes on to talk about my other people I've gone out with, and then just my reflection on dating as a whole. And so I have another essay I'd like to share part of that's called Nothing Like the Last Minute, which is how I have dealt with or struggled with procrastination throughout my life. I don't know if we have any other procrastinators out there, but if we do, I hope you can relate to this. I used to stress out way more when I was younger, and especially when I tell people about this procrastination issue of mine. Often when I tell my friends I had not started yet on an essay or project, they look at me like I was a crazy person. Don't even get me started on my parents. Hi, Dad. They would get all concerned about me, but in the least helpful way possible. By that I mean they would yell at me or punish me by grounding me from electronics or things, because I was obviously distracted. This made me feel very shameful, so I stopped sharing with people that I was continuing to procrastinate again and again. I remember that I began to feel really bad about myself for a little while, because I didn't know what was wrong with me, and I felt like no one else could relate or to what I was going through. I just couldn't help myself but to wait to do things until the last minute, and I didn't know why. It wasn't until I got to college that I started wearing my procrastination like a badge of honor. When I immersed myself into the Artistic and Creative Society in college, that's when I realized that I was not alone. I had finally found my people. The people that pulled all-nighters to finish an essay or story or project. The people that lived solely off of coffee and the occasional bag of Cheez-Its for a week. These are the people that taught me that procrastinating is not necessarily a bad thing, and that I at least shouldn't feel ashamed of it. I learned that the reason why I was procrastinating all the time was because of my creativity, and that because I have so many creative ideas and thoughts. It makes it easier for my brain to concentrate if I'm on a time crunch. This made all the sense in the world to me, and it made me feel really good about myself. I began walking around feeling all confident and whatnot because I was apparently a creative genius. That's what I told myself, at least. The revelation that I wasn't alone in this issue and that it wasn't necessarily bad that I struggled with procrastinating constantly gave me reassurance. It made me feel okay. That is until I Googled information about procrastination. Google is a fun time. Let me just say, Google can be quite brutal and unforgiving sometimes. According to Charlotte Lieberman from the New York Times, procrastination is not a unique character flaw or a mysterious curse on your ability to manage time, but a way of coping with challenging emotions and negative moods induced by certain tasks such as boredom, anxiety, insecurity, frustration, resentment, self-doubt, and beyond, whatever that means. This information completely shattered my perception of the concept. Not to mention that all of the feelings from my childhood and the negative thoughts about myself came flooding right back. There we go. I guess if I really think about it, my procrastination issue could be derived from some of those things that have caused me anxiety or frustration. A lot of my procrastination takes place when I have to do tasks like homework or pack for a trip or something, and the thought of having to do whatever task it is usually stresses me out or irritates me when it's something I don't necessarily care for, and I must devote some of my precious time to it. I don't know about other procrastinators, but I myself have almost always been successful in the matter. Not only that, but when I'm working on something last minute, it's like I get this sort of buzz from it. You know how there's things like a runner's high? I'm not sure what to call how I feel when working on something that I procrastinated on, but I really think it feels the same as a runner's high. In times like these, I like to believe that my creative genius friends, that procrastination is a blessing rather than a curse. I still don't quite know how I feel about myself and procrastination, and I can most definitely say that it's something I'm still wrestling with today, and as much stress as I feel leading up to actually working on the task, once I work on it, I get that high and amazing things happen. I will also say that even though I have become more accepting of my issue, I've also gotten better at time management and not procrastinating on every little thing I have to do in my life. I realize that it's probably something I'm going to deal with for the rest of my life. But whoever came up with the phrase sooner rather than later probably created it for people like me as motivation. I much rather prefer the phrase better late than never. So that is my essay on procrastination. Thank you so much for having me.